Welcome to today's broadcast of Sun, Salt, and Light. Sun, Salt, and Light, S-O-N, knowing and growing in your daily relationship with Jesus Christ, but also being the salt and the light in your marriage, in your family, at your place of work, at your church, and even in the community you're in. I'm Pastor Michael Petit. This is a radio ministry of our church, Calvary Chapel Divine, here in Divine, Texas. We are so glad that you joined us for today's broadcast. We are a Calvary Chapel, so we simply teach the Bible verse by verse, chapter by chapter. We believe that God uses His Word to transform, restore, and to change lives one verse at a time. If you're visiting our area, you'd like to get information about our church or church service times, maybe even track down some of the other teachings that we have available through podcast, whether it's through Audible or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can do all of that at our church website at calvarydivine.org. That's calvarydivine.org. We were looking at cast sheep, and what cast sheep are sheep that fall over, that because sheep cannot defend themselves, sheep can't really help themselves, so when they fall over, they're pretty much bait for vultures and other animals to come and eat. At the same time, it causes problems with their digestive system, and they start losing feeling in their legs. And so as soon as a sheep is cast or missing, the shepherd goes out and looks for it immediately. Now, last week we talked about sheep that were cast that were full of wool. And we talked about Shrek the sheep that was missing for 6 years. And the reason why he was missing, he didn't like to be sheared. And no sheep really likes to be sheared by the shepherd. That's including you and me. When it's time for us to have something removed or taken care of, remember I talked about the shepherd having to pull the shears out, and sometimes your wool gets infected and you may have to pull the scalpel out and cut some stuff out. And so that's what we looked at last week. As we continue in chapter 5, the next group of sheep that become cast are the comfortable sheep. The comfortable sheep. And so it's very dangerous for us as we think about our Christian life. I think the worst things that can happen to a church is when they become comfortable. I don't think we've had that problem because we're a young church, so we've had to pivot and move a lot. I mean, there are times that we won't even get this room. We'll have to move down to the other room because they may have an event happening or something going on, and so we have to pack up and move down that way, and the church does that. And so you get uncomfortable very quickly. We have to set up quickly and do things that we're not used to doing. But when we are comfortable, it has a tendency, when there's no hardship, that we're no longer self-disciplined. We start to lose our hunger for the Word at times. Our relationship with the Lord can kind of dissipate during that time of comfort because we think we got it all made. And, we talked about that when we talked about Christians that are mature. And I was telling y'all, one of the things that really bothers me the most is to see somebody who's mature in their faith. They've been walking with the Lord for over 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, and they're not growing anymore. Billy Graham used to always say he wants fat disciples, faithful, available, teachable. You should always be teachable and willing to grow. And to be teachable means you're going to be uncomfortable. That means somebody's going to have to share something with you at times that you may not want to hear. And that can be hard at times. So one of the things we do want to look at as we talk about cast sheep that are comfortable, let's look at Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9, verse 58. And Jesus kind of explains this as he talks about, hey, to be one of my followers, you may be homeless. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. To follow him means that you could actually end up homeless. Are you willing to do that? To follow him in China, you could actually end up in jail. In North Korea, jail. Are you willing to do that? In the Middle East, you could lose your head or stoned to death. And see, when we think about comfort, we're comfortable in the United States. Even though it may seem like you're not comfortable right now, it's still pretty comfortable. It's sad to see how much news is out there and how much stuff is going on, and people just scroll right past it. They're oblivious to it because of their comfort. It doesn't affect them in their day-to-day, but they don't realize every time you go to the store, you go to the grocery store, you go to the gas station, it's affecting you. One of the saddest things I saw was yesterday was a lady who lived her whole life in Oakland and has to move from Oakland because they're just killing people. Dude was outside cutting his trees and the guys just walk up and shot him. And they tell you you need to get an air horn. So when somebody breaks in or somebody's shooting, just hit the air horn so all the rest of the neighbors can do it. And the only thing I kept thinking is, as they're interviewing that person, is ask the lady who she voted for. Did she vote for the same people? Because what happens is we get comfortable. And we don't think these things can affect us. And we're seeing a city melting down, Oakland. A fentanyl camp that they made. Had 5,000 homeless, now it has 10,000. They can't keep it from it's always on fire. And this is what's happening in our country, but what happens is we're just doing, and our minds are numb. We're not paying attention. We have brothers and sisters in California that are struggling. Hawaii, in Maui. Fires. And the reality of it is like we're in our comfort. And to be followers of Jesus Christ, we need to understand that our faith, even though we're saved by grace, we're saved by faith through grace, and it's not by works. It's still, when we serve God, it costs us something. It needs to cost us something. In 2 Samuel chapter 24, verses 24, it says, "But the king said to Adonai, Not, but I will buy it buy it from you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to my Lord, my God, that cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen, the 50 shekels of silver. It has to cost. In Luke chapter 7, verses 36 through 50, it says, "One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at the table," Jesus, "and the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair of her head and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment." It cost her everything to walk into the Pharisee's house. Everything that she owned was in that alabaster flask. And she was willing to anoint Christ. The Pharisees doesn't do anything for Christ as he comes into the house. But this woman is anointing his feet. She's letting everybody know at this moment that she belongs to Jesus. There's a great book by Kyle Idleman called Not a Fan. And he talks about the casual follower of Christ. The fan of Christ, right? A fan of Christ. I'm not a follower, I'm just a fan. I like the things he represents, but I'm not going to follow. And that's what happens when we get comfortable. We want heaven, but we don't want to do anything while we're here on earth. And God's it's like we just talked about it this past week, and every one of you has received a gift from God to use within the ministry of the church for one another. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, it says, So put away all malice and deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Like newborn infants long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation. He's like, when you're a newborn, you're wanting the spiritual milk. Don't go back to the spiritual milk. You need to start eating a meal. And that meal is the Word of God. Back in Luke, in that verse, he says, as Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So Jesus comes right out and says, you know what? You could be homeless. You're going to either choose one or two things. You're going to choose that comfort, or you're going to choose the cross. Which one are you choosing? And that's what the shepherd here is W. Philip Keller is trying to get across to us, is like, if you're his follower, you're a follower, you're not a fan. Don't allow comfort to lull you to sleep, and then you become cast. Luke chapter 9, verse 23, and he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. You have to remember that the cross is not some necklace or prop that you put up in your house. It's something that he tells you, you carry your cross. You deny yourself, you die to self, you follow me. We don't memorize these verses. Luke 14:26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. He's telling you, look, within this relationship that you're having with Christ, it's like, I am the most important thing in your life, not your comfort. Not your comfort. Now, honestly, I believe that's why we're in the time that we're in right now. God is making a lot of people uncomfortable across the world. Because he exposed a lot of fans in 2019 and 20. We had a lot of fans sitting in the church, and they got exposed. And so for us, as we talk about these cast sheep, is to remember, like, you're choosing not comfort, but you're choosing the cross. None of these things should have a hold of you. Your job, your money, your house, your car, those things are secondary to Christ. But with a lot of people, if you think about it, even in the church today, a lot of people care more about their house or their retirement plan or their position at work than they ever cared about Jesus. And Jesus is saying, look, I come first. Because when you put something above me for comfort, you will be cast. Eventually, you'll lull yourself to sleep and fall right over. At the gate, look at Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 25. It says, there was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, who was feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, who was covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried in Hades. And being tormented, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in the water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things, but now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. He's like, look, you focused on those things that brought you comfort. You had somebody right outside your door that was in need, and you would not help them. Lazarus was there. Your dogs were licking his wounds. He ends up dying. And you had plenty from your table. And you didn't even try to help him or feed him. In James chapter 2, verses 14 through 17, it says, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, be warmed and filled,' without giving them the things needed for the body, what is good, so also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." We are prepared for good works. When all you're focused on is your self-indulgence and your comfort, it's easy for you to go out to the pastor and be cast. The rich young ruler in Mark chapter 10, verses 19 through 22 says, "Now you know the commandments: do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your father and your mother." And he answered and he said to him, "Teacher, all these things I have kept from my youth." Then Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said to him, "One thing you lack. Go your way, sell whatever you have, and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come take up your cross and follow me." But he was sad at this word. He went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Do you see what it says there in that verse? Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said. Remember we talked about love and truth? Jesus didn't pull no punches. This is exactly what this young man needed to hear, because he cared more about his comfort than he cared about his possessions, than he cared about following Jesus. And we have people like that today. If you continue on in Luke chapter 9, verse 59, it says, "Then he said to another, 'Follow me.' But he said, 'Lord, let me first go bury my father.'" The thing is the phrase that's used there, to bury his father's not even dead. 2 reasons. It's going to get uncomfortable if I tell Dad I'm following Jesus, because he's either going to stone me to death or kick me out with nothing. Or if I wait for my father to die, I get all this stuff, and when I'm on the mission field, I'm going to have comfort because I got money. And so that's where his head is at. And Jesus said, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and preach the kingdom of God." And he says in Luke chapter 6, verse 46, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you?" He's like, it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy at times. Your comfort is not his concern. His concern is that you follow him. Now, there'll be comfort at times. You'll have that. You'll have the peace of Christ. You'll have the joy, right? And by following him, there is comfort in that. But don't depend. I think the biggest thing that you can get from this cast sheep is, don't depend on the world for your comfort. Depend on Jesus Christ for that. Look to the cross. Well, that concludes today's broadcast of Sun, Salt, and Light Radio. We hope that you enjoyed it. If you'd like to submit a prayer request or get in contact with us to find out service times, you can do all of that at our website, as well as get our podcast at Spotify, Audible, TuneIn Radio. Pretty much wherever you can find a podcast, you can just type in Sun, Salt, and Light and you'll find it.